Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenmara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight is back to our series, Occult and Crochet. So we're going to start off with, I finished the last shawl, and it is officially posted on my website. It's a one and only. It's that yarn is a pretty expensive yarn. It's merino wool, so that is posted, and I have some other new items posted over there, some new organs if you're interested. But my current project is another shawl. This one's a cotton based shawl, and it's really intense red and orange right now, and it is a butterfly styled shawl, so you've got the little butterflies there if that shows up. And don't mind my ends, I haven't been weaving any of those in yet, kind of like little dragonflies. And it is actually going to be on a kind of rainbow style yarn, so it's going to be a really cool looking pattern when it's finished. It's going to end with that really nice purple. But that's the current project, so keep your eyes open for that one if you're interested in something a little bit more whimsical. And tonight, though, as far as our discussion topic goes, let's wander a little bit more into the realm of the witches. I know that's been a thing for a minute, but let's find out a little bit more about why the belief of Wicca had to be reborn. Why would someone like Gerald Gardner need to bring something out of hiding? Why would there need to be laws about witches on the books in several countries, really up until the last century or so? And there's, I think, a few countries still, when I was looking it up, that still have some unenforced, but there's still some laws out there and about witchcraft and witches, which is weird in today's world. There's got to be a reason for all this, right? Somewhere in the depths of history. Well, let's start by bringing up some of the people who were involved and some of the people who drove folk magic or witchcraft back into the broom closet. And as we go along, we can see some of the motives, the blatant falsities, and the power plays that drove a lot of the old ways into the shadows. My mouse is still giving me problems. Sorry, just one second. With these figures, full disclosure here, I will not be going in any particular order, mainly because I bring figures from the time as I feel led. So for the foreseeable future, probably the next few weeks or so, we're going to be bringing a few people from the witch hunters, as well as maybe some more modern day occultists, just kind of filling in some blanks. We're going to stick with the theme, though, of Wicca, witchcraft, that line of thought for the moment. Unless you guys have other suggestions, in which case let me know in the comments. So, first of all, I want to introduce someone that is a little different. His name is Nicholas Remy. And why should we care about him? Starting at his beginning, good place to start usually. There's some people that it's actually more interesting to start further on in their life, but with Remy, we'll start at his beginning. Nicholas Remy was born in 1530. So we're in the way back machine. This is like, 500 years ago, give or take. And he was born in France to his father, Gerard Remy, who was a provost, which is, for modern language, basically a mayor of a town called Chamres, and he was raised in a very Catholic household. No derogatory, that's just how he was raised. And when I say very Catholic, it was said to be pretty strict about a lot of things. And this religion would have a huge influence on Nicholas's later life. It is said that he came from a family of lawyers and law practitioners. So, like Dad being a provost, had an uncle who was involved as well, and it basically said that he was tied to much with the legal system as well as numerous nobilities. And this would lead him to be present, thanks to all these people attached to this type of stuff, to trials of supposed witches, leading him to his choice of schooling. Not that he really had a choice from what it sounded like. Nicholas studied law at the University of Toulouse, and he would then go on to practice law from around 1563 to the early 1570s, although that was more of a public thing. It eventually transmuted into something bigger for him, because that was when he was just kind of an everyday lawyer, nothing super special during that window of time. Nicholas also was married. The records are interesting on Nicholas. It was either once or twice. There's a little bit of confusion here. And apparently, according to every source that talked about his marital status and kids, he was quite a fertile gentleman. Or the winters were really cold in France. Either way, he had a lot of children. And at least 4 boys that are referenced, although there's discussion of up to 10 kids. The records are a little sketch on that, and I did dig around trying to track down if there's still like a bloodline. Couldn't find anything direct. Not that it matters, but but this did not stop his upward movement, and probably in that time period, more kids, more stability meant affluence, and so it was probably encouraged his upward mobility. And with that upward mobility comes in his uncle, a retired lieutenant general of Vosges. I had no idea what or where Vosges was, so let's have a geography lesson. Starting off with this guy. So the dark green part over here is the actual area of Vosges, but if you look at the map, you can see where the dark green is. It actually borders Germany. The light green is France. There's a little dot right about here. That is where Paris is, so it's on the eastern border of France. This area connects to the Palantian forest in Germany, creating a forested area of around 3,100 square miles. That's a good chunk of land, really. And it talks about having medium mountains. Well, is that like a hill? What would you call a medium mountain? They define mountains as a short range with the highest peak at 4,600 feet, and that being the mountain Grand Ballon. The second highest peak would be Storkenkopf at 4,482. To be brutally honest, where I'm sitting right now is at higher elevation than either one of those peaks, and when I go camping, it's almost twice that. So there's that, but there it is. This is one of the outposts from that area. This is in Vosges, and then this, oops, gotta hide things in the right order here. This is one of the little mountain lakes. It is beautiful. I was going through looking at different people's pictures, a lot of tourists and traveler pictures. Highly recommend going to check out pictures from this area. It's spelled, the area is called Vosges. It's a place just off the pictures I want to visit, and some of the little villages and towns that are still very much in the old school style, electricity wires and things, but otherwise not much looks like it's changed in the last 500 years there. It's a beautiful location. I just had to kind of giggle a little bit when they're like, this really high peak at 4,600 feet. Okay, I'm living at about 6,000 right now. So that's actually would be a nice place to vacation, because I wouldn't feel like I was dying. Us chunky kids don't do well in high elevations. And so back to Nicholas, and this is one of his images that was sketched and or painted around the time of his elevation, when his uncle retired. So this was around the time he would have taken his uncle's position, and this would be the Lieutenant General of Vosges. And this eventually, thanks to this position as Lieutenant General, would lead to him being elevated to the secretary to Duke Charles III of Lorraine. And that would occur in or around 1575. While Nicholas was being a lawyer and rising through the political ranks, he was also keeping copious notes and journals. And apparently he really liked to write poetry and some history as well. I was looking up some stuff, and I found that he wrote several books on poetry and history, although most of that is going to be in archived libraries and private collections. I personally didn't find anything that was still available publicly, but that is not his main legacy. That's why it's really not that big of a deal anymore. I mean, it could be. I'd love to see some of his old history, his old poetry, but what is his legacy? Why are we even talking about him? That would be the pardon me with this, I really tried and I listened to it multiple times to get it right. Demonolatry Libra Tres, or the book Demonolatry. Eventually, or even though he was in France, he wrote this work in the traditional scholarly language, which was in Latin. And we kind of have an idea of why he was writing this book, because of how he was raised, where he was raised, all that fun stuff. But there was one thing that kind of solidified him needing to put this information into a physical text. This next section's a little bit wonky. I wanted to get this part in, and then we're going to go back a few years and fill in the blanks. Like I said, sometimes it's good to bounce around. Apparently Nicholas's favorite son, his son he favored above all others, the apple of the father's eye, so to speak, had an accident. It is said that Nicholas refused, not really sure what just happened there, my notes went all language weird. Nicholas refused to give alms to a poor street woman. Of course he would. And this woman became enraged, and it is said that she screamed a curse at Nicholas. This curse would play out in a tragic accident, and I couldn't find the exact details of what said accident looked like, but favored son was now favored graveyard. This incident fueled his career. He already had some career in hunting witches, but this would be the thing that triggered him to turn into the ultimate witch hunter for his era. And this particular accident would occur in 1582. Because of this woman's supposed curse, he hunted down this woman using every resource he had, which at this point was substantial because of his position, and he would prosecute her to the point where she would be executed for the practice of witchcraft and communing with the devil. And this was the thing that really set in his mind that he had to put down his beliefs and his practices in a book. This had to be published for other people to see, and it was this time period that triggered that. So, this book ended up being really important. A lot more important than most people realize, and I can bet you, unless you've studied into the darker aspects of history, you've never heard of it. This book was published in 1595, and it was reprinted multiple times in its original language, Latin, as well as in German, France, and several other languages over the years. It was a book primarily on hunting those who practiced witchcraft. And the reason that I say you may not have ever heard of this book, even though it was extremely important in its day, this book gained more authority and more respect than the book of witch hunting that was still known today, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Witch's Hammer or Hammer of Witches, depending on your definition. That in and of itself is a huge feat, even though his book today is not as well known. it's a little clumsy on the tongue to say. The Malleus Maleficarum, oddly enough, is easier to say. The Malleus was the primary book in his lifetime dedicated to hunting a witch, deciding if a person was a witch, and it would be the book that led to so many deaths over the years. And Nicholas's book took the Malleus's place. It became the text for hunting witches for around a century. So it turned into a very important book and a very dangerous book at the same time. His book covers two primary subjects. Most of them stick to one, but his did too. And one of them was the nature of Satanism in general. The second primary subject was the actions of witches as a whole. And I don't understand why during this time period, there's a few of these times, but this time period around 13th century to about the mid 1800s or so, there was this really big focus on what people did in their bedrooms. No one cares, stay out of there. If two people are consenting, leave them alone. But Nicholas placed great attention in his work on the more amorous activities of his witches. Was it because of the repressive lifestyle that was being bred due to the way the church was ran at the time? Not saying shade, just making a true statement. They really didn't want you, what we would say today, rolling in the hay unless you were procreating. There was no other reason for it. It was not to be enjoyed. It was not to be something as a sacred art, as those in the East would see it. It was to procreate only, and you were unclean forever if you did that. Calm down there, cupcakes. But this is where Nicholas's training and mind and how he was raised came into play. So in his mind, and he would claim that a witch would copulate with the devil as a way to gain power, and it was in his mind the only way a witch could achieve power was to allow the devil to have his way. And the more a witch slept around, not just with the devil but with anybody, willingly or unwillingly at that point, the more the devil would be anchored into this world. Well, there might be something to that. Anyway, he would base his writings on his personal experiences, and my next question to him would be, what experiences are you talking about? Are we talking about you with the witches? What's going on here? But he's more talking about his torture of the witches to gain truth, and then their trials and subsequent executions. I read clips and bits of this book as I was doing research for this. I've not read the complete text. What's interesting, though, is I have run across this name multiple times in other books of through the Dark Ages, and if you study much into the history of witchcraft beyond, going way back beyond Gerald Gardner, the Malleus Maleficarum and Demonolatry are two very, very commonly referenced books. I linked the Demonolatry in the description if you're interested in picking up a book like that. But I will say the book is going to be a little bit hard to read. The translated texts that I did find online, just kind of scanning through it, looking for information, they're a little bit clunky. They're a little bit hard to read. Not saying it's impossible, but you got to remember that was 500 years ago, and language changes a lot in that time. So there's that. And this is how you can tell that this was personal business to Nicholas. He lost his son to someone who supposedly practiced witchcraft, and now he was going to stop this evil, quote-unquote, belief from existing, and he would stamp it out through any means necessary. He came to believe that there was a secret coven of witches all over France, an underground coven of witches undermining the church's power and their authority and anchoring evil into the world. Someone read too many sci-fi novels, didn't he? I'm sorry. I am sorry, but I'm not, because the beliefs during this time, especially around this type of subject were so over the top and so outlandish that you literally could be tried as a witch for having your hair change color over a summer. My hair changes color if I'm out in the sun for more than 30 minutes. No. Like, that's how bad it was during that time. It was completely illogical how they hunted witches. He would claim that anything that couldn't be explained by the science of their day was under the banner of demonology. The science of the time also thought that leeches were the best way to deal with a headache, so I'm not really sure if their science was acceptable. And that is a really scary take when you think about it. Tonight's kombucha is elderberry juniper. It's kind of a floral pine flavor. It's really good. Again, not sponsored, just really like the beverage. A lot of what we would see today as just everyday things would be considered witchcraft back in that time. And even with our technology today, scientists cannot explain everything that we in the mystic community know to be true. Science today cannot figure out remote viewing. They're getting there, but not quite yet. They cannot explain energy work, energy healing, the concept of meditation. We can look at it in like a functional MRI, but understanding it from a scientific experience, not really, because everyone's going to have a similar but not same experience, which takes it out of a lot of the scientific theories. There's not a way in our current environment, at least with the information they've made public to us from science, to quantify a lot of the mystic experience. So take away our technology, go back 500 years and tell me what was really unexplained at that time, and see how rampantly insane these witch hunters could have been. It was a dangerous time. And as we go through this and I go into some other people, we'll go into some of these other guys. Nicholas was bad because of what he wrote, but there's some of these people, history does not look kindly on them. They were way worse than Nicholas, to be 100% honest with you. Nicholas, where am I at? My mouse moved. Nicholas would primarily hunt women for the crime of witchcraft. There were a few men tossed in there, but his main one was the women were the problem, and he was going to go after them come hell or high water, literally. And being very educated and well respected, Nicholas would get people's support to the point where he would condemn, according to his claims, we'll discuss that in a minute, around 900 people to the grave in just over a decade. He bragged about how many people he'd taken care of. And it was just over a decade, between 1570, 1591. It was closer to 2 decades, but all the references kept saying that a window of time, and it was around a decade. If you look at the broad bank of time, it was 1570 to 1591, so we're looking at like 20 years. Nicholas would become known as the Scourge of the Witches in France. His obsession would catch the attention of the local duke, and the duke would confer a noble title upon Nicholas for his job as a witch hunter. To me, this is a little bit weird. Why would you reward someone who is obviously unstable and literally could turn on you at the blink of a hat, and have the entire weight of the church and the not exactly honest legal system of the time turn against you in a heartbeat? I think he was currying favor to keep Nicholas from turning on him, but that's personal opinion there. During the time that he hunted witches, he hunted in every city and village throughout Lorraine, which is a much larger area than Vassage even, and there was not a city too big or a village too small or too poor or impoverished where he would not find at least one practitioner of witchcraft, and he vowed to wipe every witch in the country out. He tortured people to get admissions to devil's packs, to hunting and breaking up wild Sabbats whenever he could. He would destroy those accused of sending illness to herds and flocks. The term that I kept seeing was he was ruthless in his hunting. I can only imagine. And I don't laugh as in like that was funny, but like the mindset of the witch hunters, right now you're getting a glimpse. There's a few of them that I have looked into and I'll talk about later that I'll have to be careful of how I talk about them to stay on YouTube, because they're that toxic of people. Nicholas would hunt witches accused of making the stars fall and the sky go dark. So nighttime. He would claim that demons would tear down a mountain in a single night because a witch willed it. I would love to see how you tear a mountain apart in a single evening because some witch had an attitude about it. Like, calm down. Anyway, he also said that he would make that a witch could make the rivers run the wrong way. Well, that's not a good thing, because where I currently reside in Idaho, within an hour's drive, there's a river that runs north to south, not south, or runs from south to the north, which is the wrong direction for rivers in my area. So does that mean there's a witch up there changing direction of the river? Like, some of his thoughts were a little interesting on this. And Nicholas also would claim that for every witch he caught and burned to ashes, at least one would escape his clutches. I would love to see his evidence of this. The guy personally sounds a little deranged, but he was a man of the time, and that was a thing. People were scared of witches hiding under their beds and behind their barns. This was the era of the time when the Catholic Church was at its highest power. It was at its highest anti-witch and anti-pagan phase. So they were doing everything they could at the time to demonize any spiritual practice that did not toe their version of reality. Nicholas was literally a sign or a result of his time frame. Again, things have changed over the years, so there's been some maturing, but during this time, there's a reason they called it the Dark Ages. Intelligence and intellect was not used much, to be honest with you. The craziness of Nicholas, though, would eventually come to an end when he would retire in 1592. Interesting reason to retire, though. The bubonic plague was wreaking havoc in the cities, so his retirement was fleeing to the country to get away from the cities where the hygiene was the problem. But don't take a bath because reasons. The bubonic plague is spread by lice on rats and rabbits. The most common thing that they would have at those times, because they weren't filthy, but the cities were not anywhere near acceptable for hygiene. So you'd end up with these extremely condensed sections of rats. Rabbits were being used as food, so you'd end up getting the bubonic plague spreading rapidly through these bigger cities. And it's not back in that time, because hygiene and just overall sanitization was so low, the bubonic plague was a death sentence if you got it. Very few people survived it. It was not pleasant. It would put these big boils, which they would call buboes, all over your body. They would be very uncomfortable. They were infected. They'd burst open. Not a pleasant thing. But during this time, it could also be said that a witch would cause such things. So when he fled to the countryside, it was because there were safer and fewer witches, was another one of his reasons. And it was during his time in the country that he would sit down and finally compile the final form of his book and put all of his notes, his journals, his I'm so special things into demonolatry. Nicholas had a theory while he was writing his book, and this is some of the stuff that I found in it, and I just had to bring it up because it was a little bit like, well, why would you think this, buddy? He had a theory that the devil would appear as a black cat. Well, that fits Hollywood today. Or And this one was a little weird to me. A dark man. And my first thought was, dude, you really went there? I get it, France was primarily very Caucasian white, but that's what you... okay. Like, he had some weird beliefs. Anyway, Nicholas would also claim that the devil would appear in a physical form to have, we'll call them amorous encounters with women in general, witches in particular. And if it was just a random woman, it didn't have to be a willing woman. The R word was a hobby of the devil's, apparently. And, you know, just putting it out there, this is how Nicholas thought of the devil, which is not really wrong. I'm not denying that the devil's not evil, but his philosophy on how to hunt the devil is what I mock, because like that's not how that works. What else would Nicholas put into his books? Well, he claimed that all witches were bound to demons. You couldn't be a witch unless you had a devil. The demons couldn't act in our world without a witch to bring in the power. So the witch would copulate with the demon to gain her power, or his power, depending on what the witch was. And by doing so, it also brought the devil through so that the devil could act more in this realm versus their realm. He claimed that all witches only practiced black magic to harm other people. Again, there's a spectrum of everything, and he took it to literally the darkest aspect. He claimed that demons would teach the practice of various poisons and powders to be used against man or beast. So he was teaching the practices of what we would term loosely today sorcery. Sorcery has less to do with magic than it does poisoning if we look at the actual definitions of words. And that was a huge thing. And I have to say, I watch a lot of true crime podcasts because they're fun, but I've also dug into this. The most typical way for a woman in this time to get revenge on a cheating spouse or someone who did something to her that was exceptionally inappropriate, being careful of my phrasing here, was to use poison. So even a scorned lover in Nicholas's mind was a witch. Not that the woman wasn't harmed and so she was basically taking the only revenge she had. No. Nicholas would pass from the world of hatred and bloodshed that he had created and bathed in. And the time frame is a little weird here. It was either 1612 or 1616. The sources, there was like 20 different, exactly clear on when he passed or what he passed of. I'm assuming old age, but could have been one of his little sorceresses didn't like him. Anyway, there is the controversy around Nicholas's claims. Obviously, the book alone was controversial. There was a later scholar, around 400 years later, who really started to question some of the things that Nicholas talked about in his book. So he would go to the court records, which were still actually in really good condition, considering 400 years had went by, and he would go through the court records looking for specifically court cases attributed to or referencing Nicholas Remy. Interestingly enough, there wasn't 900. There wasn't 800. There was just over 100 cases of witchcraft or any form of trial or court proceeding specifically attributed to Nicholas Remy. This led this particular scholar to believe that Nicholas was trying to bolster his place in history by upping his number by, 900%. This scholar also noted that Nicholas thought himself to be a warrior in the fight against those who countered the church of the day. He was a right fighter. The scholar also suggested, looking at history, looking at what Nicholas did, going through way more thoroughly than I have patience for, the information of the time, he suggests that the work in Nicholas's book was to be, quote, taken with a large grain of salt. So Nicholas wrote this amazing book about hunting witches, which turned out to be pretty much drivel. I mean, obviously, by the time that this research was done with the scholar was the 1800s, give or take. And he was like, Nicholas didn't do half the things he claimed, and the book is more fabrication and false than anything else. But it does show an important window into the time frame of the Dark Ages. The Malleus Maleficarum and demonolatry are referenced multiple times in historical records from that area, going back to and talking about this is how people believed that those who stood out from the crowd, what they were. So let's say a woman whose hair would get lighter in the summer because she was out in the field all day and she didn't wear a bonnet, she would be considered a witch because the sun bleached her hair. Or people who do things like energy work, people who were understanding of herbs and herbal healing instead of using leeches, those people would have been considered witches of the time because the church or science didn't sanction that art or that skill. That's where the later scholars would really actually start mocking Nicholas. And he was important because of what happened in the day, but just like the author of the Malleus Maleficarum later became almost a joke because they were so focused on not using reason, even though they claimed to be logical, they weren't, because common sense would have told you that this is not how this works. But fear and superstition, especially coming down from someone who's telling you that your very soul is at stake, will give someone a very heady rush of power. And that's pretty much what happened with Nicholas. And if you're interested as to maybe if you have heard the name of this book before, that would mean you're a connoisseur of fine horror films. His name and the book specifically show up in the old 1987 through 88 series called Werewolf. I remember watching that when I was growing up. I probably shouldn't have, but I did see it. And it's not in print anymore, so there's that. But then he also shows up in a very interesting film in 1999 featuring Johnny Depp called The Ninth Gate, which is an amazingly fun movie. It's a slow burn film, but it has a really great ending to it. And it's all about books on demonology, dark magic, the occult. It's a fun book or movie if you haven't seen it yet. With that, what are your what are your thoughts on the subject? Do you think that Nicholas was completely full of things, or for his time, do you think he was doing the right thing and had the full belief that he was doing it for the right reasons? Again, this is an overview. There's weirdly enough not as much out there as you would think about this particular gentleman. His book is literally his legacy. There are older versions of it, not so much the newer ones. There is reference in the newer ones, but the older versions of his book would have his children do the foreword for his book. And I think the most recent edition, which is the one I linked, has copies or at least facsimiles of the original texts. So whether they're translated into English or not, I'm not sure. Because like I said, I've only read bits and pieces that I found online. This is another one of those books where I want to pick it up, I want to sit down and put some time into it, and then just do an entire video or essay or whatever of just the book, because something tells me this is going to be a bit more fascinating than the Malleus. So, but if you've read it, let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on it, because I am curious to what other people think about this type of stuff. And as I said, the next few episodes of Occult and Crochet, I'm going to be introducing some of the key witch hunters. Probably not all of them, because it was about 250, 300 years of these people, so that's a lot. But there are some key names that pop up, so we'll be going over those. Just to kind of give you an idea of why today the term witch has such a negative connotation. A good 95+% of it is based on erroneous information from people like Nicholas Remy and his book Demonolatry. So with that, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on the video, and like I said, comment down below, let me know your thoughts if you've read this book before, if it's something that you've heard about and want to know more, because I do want to actually go through and do a kind of a deep dive on the book itself, because I've read enough of the Malleus now to know that there's a lot more to these books than what meets the eye. It's not good, but there's a lot more there. So if that's something you guys are interested in, let me know. With that, I'll let you guys go. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next video.